Draco Malfoy and the Dark Lord's Diary. By Draco will hear about this. Chapter 7. The Honorary Gryffindor. Madame Pomfrey almost dropped the vial of the potion she was holding in relief at seeing Draco. She then interrupted the act of applying the antidote to the victims to see Draco to a bed and procure a steaming cup of hot chocolate spiked with some drops of calming draught. "I will be with you in a moment, dear," she said, rather gently for the usually impatient nurse. "Let me just finish here first." With that, she left Draco and his mother to their own devices. Narcissa Malfoy hesitated for a moment before she took a seat next to her son on the bench, a careful hand on his shoulder. "I'm so sorry you had to go through this, darling," she whispered. "I wished you had told me sooner so that I could have helped you." "What was I supposed to say?" Draco demanded shakily. "Mother, father has set a legendary monster upon the school. Please help me save the Muggle-born students." His fingers clenched around the warm mug in his hands. "Would you really have helped me?"
"Draco," she sighed, "there is little I wouldn't do for you, my love. And it pains me that you would think I'd agree with anything that puts your life, or those of the people important to you, in danger."
Draco gulped, willing himself not to cry again.
"And I am frankly appalled that your father was willing to go to such lengths," she added, her voice turning frosty. "This is going to have consequences for him, I assure you."
Their conversation was interrupted, though, when Weasley entered the room, a tearfully curious Lockhart in tow. "You okay there, Malfoy?" he asked hesitantly. Draco nodded wordlessly. "Good. Dumbledore sent me to bring in Lockhart. Where is Madame Pomfrey?" The nurse turned up from behind the curtains at the words, looking weary.
"What has happened to him?" she demanded. "I am rather busy, you know."
"His memory charm backfired," Weasley informed her sheepishly. "He doesn't have a clue who he is."
"Oh, Martin!" Madame Pomfrey sighed, raising an eyebrow. "Well, choose an empty bed, Professor. I'll attend to you later. If your memory can be retrieved, it can wait."
With that, she returned to her work on the victims, disappearing behind the curtains. Lockhart stood, smiling mildly, not moving, before Weasley pushed him onto a random bed, rolling his eyes. "I'll go up to the Gryffindor Tower," he told Draco. "Ginny and everyone will be worried sick, and it seems McGonagall is preparing a feast and celebration. You think he'll be able to come?" "Don't know," Draco shrugged, feeling weird in the face of Weasley's obvious attempts at being kind to him. "Right," Weasley said awkwardly. "Well, I'll see you later, anyhow." Draco nodded, watching the other boy leave. Draco and his mother did not say anything for a long time after. Draco quietly drank his chocolate, feeling the beverage and the potion warm him from within. His heart rate started to slow, and he eventually stopped trembling. His mother drew gentle fingers over his back, drawing calming circles into it. Draco almost felt like himself again when his father burst through the door. His eyes were wild, and his face was flushed with fury. "We're going, Narcissa," he bellowed. He did not look at his son, instead focusing his gaze solely on his wife, and Draco felt the hand on his back freeze in its motion.
"Excuse me?" she asked softly,
dangerously. "We're going,"
he repeated sharply. "I think not," she replied. "I'd like to stay with our son. Our very traumatized son, who has been faced with terrifying dark magic these past few months, all you're doing, as I gather."
Lucius glared at her before his eyes zoomed in on Draco. "You have no proof that I was involved," he spat. "If I were you, I'd be careful what I accuse my father of." "Dobby can testify to it," Draco protested immediately. "You rest your words on a filthy house elf's testimony," he scoffed, laughing shortly. "Have you learned nothing from me about how the world works, Draco?" Draco did not answer, knowing perfectly well that his father was right. He had no proof against him, at least none that any authorities would take seriously. "You wait till you come home," he breathed. "I'll show you what happens when you try to incriminate your own father, you ungrateful—"
"That is enough, Lucius," Draco's mother hissed. "I will not tolerate you speaking to my son like that."
His father looked up at her, and they just glared at each other for a long moment, which was only broken by the voice of Madame Pomfrey, whose return Draco had not even noticed.
This is an infirmary, she reminded them snidely, and your son has been severely traumatized. Either you stop arguing, or you leave.
Draco's father straightened up in a poorly disguised scramble for dignity, and without a word left the hospital wing. His mother sighed, getting to her feet as well. I'd like to stay, darling, but I really think your father and I need to have a serious word with each other, she said grimly. Do you think you'll be all right on your own? Of course, Mother. Draco nodded, setting the empty mug down on the bedside table and standing to face her. I'm fine. I'll write to you in the morning, she promised, leaning in to kiss his forehead. Rest well, my little dragon. Draco smiled at the pet name, and with another kiss on the top of his head, she turned to follow after his father. Almost immediately after she had left, the door swung open once more, and Harry came into the room. Draco. He smiled, crossing the distance to him. How are you? Better, Draco said honestly. What happened in McGonagall's office? Father was furious when he turned up here. Well, Harry shrugged. Dumbledore told him that he'd find a way to hold him responsible if, any other school supplies of Voldemort's found their way into innocent hands, or something along those lines. Oh, and I kind of freed Dobby. You did what? Draco asked, taken aback. Well, I made your father give him a sock without realizing. He didn't take it all too well, as you can imagine. This startled a laugh out of Draco. Harry smiled, looking pleased. Only you, Harry, Draco chuckled, shaking his head. I'd say you quickly made your way up to the top of Father's list. Well, he's pretty much up there on mine, too, Harry said lightly. So are you coming to the feast? Draco frowned. The image of walking into the great hall after the revelation that he had been acting, however unwillingly, as a puppet for the heir of Slytherin frightened him. I don't know, Harry, he muttered. I think it's best if I just stay here. Oh, come off it, Harry pleaded. It wasn't your fault. There was no reason for you to hide. But Dumbledore said I should stay here, remember? Draco pointed out. I'm sure he'd agree that you need some distraction, Harry insisted. Madame Pomfrey? There was a short discussion with the nurse, who seemed unwilling to let Draco go without a proper checkup, but she relented eventually, conceding that she had her hands full with the treatment of the basilisk's victims. She advised Draco to come back the moment he felt poorly, and sent them off their way. When they arrived at the entrance hall, students were already filing into the great hall, still dressed in their pajamas and chattering loudly. A group of gingers broke through the masses, approaching them in fast steps. Weasley, his little sister, the twins, and the prefect. Draco noted that Ginny's eyes were red and swollen, as if she had been crying for hours. Suddenly Draco wanted to run. He was not capable of dealing with almost the whole Weasley family after his father had tried to drive their youngest into death in the worst case and into criminality in the best. He came to an immediate halt, and Harry's hand flew to his arm in retaliation. Draco, he began. Avery! Malfoy! Weasley called. Thank Merlin that you are here. We were just contemplating whether Madame Pomfrey would allow us all entrance to the hospital wing. Are you all right, Draco? Ginny asked in a small voice, tearful eyes having zoomed in on him. Draco was lost for anything to say. His heart was pounding loudly in his ears, and for a moment he felt dizzy. Harry, though, still had his hand firmly on his elbow, and was watching him closely before he turned to the Weasleys, speaking for Draco. He's still in shock, but he's not hurt, he declared. Thank Godric for that, the prefect said quietly. We've got to thank you, Draco, mate, one of the twins said seriously, clapping Draco on the shoulder, while the other nodded vehemently. Draco's head spun, unable to process the words he just heard. He blinked, staring at them uncomprehendingly. What? He finally brought out, his voice rough. You saved our little sister! The first twin pointed out. Without you, it would have been her down there in the chamber, the second twin added. Not only that, the prefect said, his face pale as he looked at his trembling sister, for once without his usual pompous air. Who knows how well she would have been able to fight the power of this diary? She might not have survived it. We owe you big time, the twin that was still holding onto Draco's shoulder concluded, squeezing down gently. But, Draco breathed, still not understanding. I attacked people. You should all hate me. Come off it, the other twin returned, eyes widening. You don't blame Ginny, and we won't blame you. You can help it, Ginny said softly, catching his eyes hesitantly.
None of us could.
Her words, more than anyone else's, managed to settle the storm of guilt and self-directed hate inside of him. Maybe it was because she, unlike anyone else, understood exactly what he had gone through. Draco nodded at her, unable to speak. He felt Harry's hand move from his elbow to the small of his back in a gesture of comfort. "Come on!" The first twin smiled, squeezing his fingers down on Draco's shoulder once more before letting go of him. "Let's go to the feast and stuff our faces!" "Yep!" The other nodded decisively, dropping an arm around Ginny's shoulders. "And you're sitting with us today, too!" "But," Draco muttered, frowning, "I'm a Slytherin." "Who cares?" Weasley said with feeling, though he was not looking at Draco. "I think we can make an exception to the rules just for tonight," the prefect said stiffly. "We declare you an honorary Gryffindor," one of the twins called cheerfully. "Right, Fred?" "Yep," the other, Fred, Draco's mind supplied, smirked. "Whoever has a problem with it can come have a word with us." Draco turned to look at Harry hesitant, but Harry was smiling brightly. "Let's go," he told Draco, and in lack of anything productive to say, Draco just nodded and followed the Weasleys into the Great Hall. The feast passed in a blur of students either staring at Draco as though he was a flying measle, or attempting to strike a conversation with him before getting quickly and resolutely blown up by Harry or a member of the Weasley clan. Dumbledore addressed the students, informing them of what had happened while giving as little detail as was diplomatically possible and awarding Harry and Weasley 200 points each for their house. At some point of the night, the freshly revived victims of the basilisk attack started to filter into the hall one by one, all of them looking varying degrees of shaken and lost. Draco tried to not meet their gazes, too guilt-ridden to do so. But it was when Hermione came running into the hall and wrapped Harry up in a bone-crushing hug, congratulating him and Weasley on figuring things out by themselves, that Draco's heart basically dropped through the floor. He kept his eyes firmly on his mostly untouched plate, trying to make himself as small as humanly possible. He wished he had Harry's invisibility cloak, he thought fleetingly, because there was no way he could face Hermione after what had happened. Hermione left him no choice, though, because shortly after releasing Harry, she wrapped her arms around Draco's shoulders, embracing him tightly from behind. "I'm so sorry we didn't figure out what was going on, Draco," she breathed into his ear. "I'm so sorry we didn't help you and that you felt like you couldn't confide in us." "What are you talking about?" Draco muttered, his voice breaking. "It's my fault, all of it. I was too much of a coward to speak up and stupidly convinced that I would be able to handle this by myself. It's because of my big head that you got petrified. You shouldn't—" "Don't you dare blame yourself, Draco!" She hissed, her tone uncharacteristically sharp. She let go of him and squeezed herself in between Weasley and Draco, finding his gaze with a fierce determination. "You're just as much of a victim as anyone who got attacked." When Draco just stared at her speechlessly, she added more gently, "I know what you're thinking, Draco, but please don't. I know you'd never have hurt anyone intentionally, much less me. You are not your father, and we know that better than anyone. Don't we, Ronald?" He turned her head towards Weasley at those last words, whose ears had turned almost as red as his hair. "Right," he muttered. "Right," Harry agreed. "So the next time anything happens, please trust us, okay? We've got your back." "I hope very much that there won't be a next time," Draco said weakly. "Oh," Hermione sighed darkly. "Sadly, I am convinced there will be." It was around 3 in the night that Hagrid returned. Azkaban had obviously not done him good, for he looked pale and tired, but his smile was bright and sincere when he directed it to Draco. "Don't you worry about it, kiddo." He shrugged off his apology. "So we both been at by him. Can't blame you for something that happened to me first, look, can I? And thanks to you kids, everyone knows I'm innocent." His face turned serious at those words. "If anything, I should thank you for clearing my name." Draco did not feel like he deserved any forgiveness, not to mention gratefulness, but the intensity of the fierce Gryffindor loyalty surrounding him would have made him a fool to question the honesty of his friend's sentiments. So he pushed his guilt back into far corners of his mind and let himself bathe in their acceptance as the celebrations continued through the night. The few remaining days of the term allowed Draco to slowly sew himself back together bit by bit. The end-of-term examinations had been cancelled, and while Hermione despaired over that particular announcement, Draco was grateful, for he felt like he couldn't have performed up to his own standards in them. Instead, Draco spent as much time as he could with his friends, due not only to the fact that Harry refused to let him leave his side unless he absolutely had to, and eventually he started to feel almost normal again. News soon reached Draco that his father had been sacked as a school governor. This, naturally, was a field day for Nott, who claimed gleefully that Draco continued to be the ruin of the Malfoy name and that soon his family would be on one level with the Weasleys. Draco had not expected anything less from Nott, and was not particularly bothered by his words, either. With everything to feel bad about, Nott's bullying or his family's reputation were pretty low on the list. But what did surprise him was that, unlike Nott's usual taunts, these did not seem to resonate as well with some of his classmates. It was Zabini who demanded, without a spark of interest in his voice, that Nott stop being an obnoxious git. Can't you see I'm reading? And Parkinson, quite pig in the face, muttered her consent to Zabini's words. Her eyes met Draco's for a moment, but before Draco could identify the emotion in them, she had already jumped up and fled the common room with some feeble excuse of searching for Daphne. Draco was unsure of how to interpret these particular events, so he pushed them out of his mind and just avoided his housemates as usual. Draco's mother, in one of the various letters she had sent since she had followed her husband out of the hospital wing, had assured him that his father was not going to bother him when they returned for the holidays, but Draco remained unconvinced. It was not that he doubted his mother's ability to put her foot down, but rather the fact that, with the whole evil diary debacle, he had lost all faith he had ever had in Lucius Malfoy as a parental figure. Ever since he had received the mysterious letter from the future, his respect for the father he had once admired so had diminished drastically, and now Draco realized that he would put absolutely nothing past him, a notion that was both disheartening and unsettling. So naturally, his mood was dull when they rode the Hogwarts Express back to London, despite the racket the Weasley twins and their friend Jordan were making in the corridor in front of their compartment. Harry, disregarding of his own dim outlook over the summer, with his return to his Muggle relatives, tried his best to stay positive, and Draco knew that his friend was doing it just to lift his spirits. At some point, he handed all three of them a piece of paper with a hastily scribbled number, instructing them to call him. Draco had no idea what that meant, but Hermione promised that she was going to explain Muggle ways of communication to him in her first letter. "We'll manage to talk this summer," Harry promised him. "We'll find a way." Draco nodded, hoping that he was right, for another summer without a word from Harry seemed like an even worse prospect than returning to live under the same roof with his father. And so, with Harry's mysterious number in his pocket and a tight hug in parting, Draco joined up with his mother to return to the Malfoy manor. "Don't look so worried, darling," she scolded him gently when she got sight of his face. "It will be fine." Draco smiled at her weakly, and with one last look towards his friends, they left platform 9 3/4 and departed for Wiltshire. End of Draco Malfoy and the Dark Lord's Diary. By Draco will hear about this. If you enjoyed this recording or the content, feel free to leave a comment below or a review at the original story from the link in the descriptions. Thank you for listening, and please subscribe for the next installment of this series.